Hey, I just finished The Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer. I'm gonna make a quick little video talking about it because someone commented on the last video I made to talk about it, and I will do that. So, Executioner's Song is about basically the life of Gary Gilmore and the lives of the people around him, and it details essentially the two homicides he committed, his time in prison, and giving up on the appeal system, and his execution, and a little bit of the events afterwards of his girlfriend and his brother and some other relatives. This was published in 1979, I believe. I think by Little Brown, I'm not sure, but Gary Gilmore was executed the beginning of the year in 1976. So 76 to 79 is when this book came out. Yeah, so this is an interesting book because I'm sure everyone reading it at the time it was published probably knew most of everything, all of the details, to varying degrees of truth about Gary Gilmore and his case and his time in prison and his relationships with other people. So reading something like this with that in mind is kind of interesting because Norman Mailer gives us a very, very detailed account of his relationships with other people, which I think is pretty interesting. And he talks about, at the end of the book in the acknowledgement section, just how much research has been done on this book, and he estimates about 300-ish people were interviewed for the writing of this novel, and he pretty much interviews every single person whose name comes up in this novel, which I think is an amazing feat for anything. But yeah, reading it for me at this point in history, almost 50 years after the main events of this book happened, I was struggling sometimes to remember that these are real people. There's millions of people have been impacted by these events, notwithstanding the book, I guess. So yeah, I was trying to keep that in mind the whole time while I was reading it, and basically this book takes you from basically the time of Gary Gilmore's release for a little bit, where he goes to live in Salt Lake with his cousin Brenda, and him basically repeating the cycles, I guess is how I would describe it. And 2 murders, him going to jail, and then eventually a little bit of stuff after that. And as this book is very large, I think I'll talk about just the very concrete things first. This book was about 1,050 pages ish. It's very large in scope. The pacing is a little strange to me. That was what I really struggled with. And in the middle section of the book, I was really, really having a difficult time trying to make myself get through it, but I did. I think that the first 400 pages and the last 200 pages of this book are really just very easy to read and perfectly written. My problem with the middle of the book is you're in this limbo, which I guess is the same as what Gary was feeling, but you're basically waiting for him to either appeal or get executed, and you're just kind of stuck in these same stale settings with a bunch of courtroom drama and and lingo, which I don't really personally care for. I'm not too big on true crime. Um, but I will mention, true crime, that whole commercialization of basically, real transgression really reflects um, pertinently on society, especially at this point in time. Um, we're kind of addicted to counterculture, and the easiest way to get to that sort of countercultural um, point of entry is through, true crime, I think, through the murders and the judicial system. And I can understand how something like this book might also contribute to that issue, but I don't really think it does. I think Norman Mailer is very, very good at kind of subtly poking holes into the amount of money that journalists were willing to throw at Gary Gilmore and the people he had relationships with, just to be able to quote them in an article. Because really that was what was surprising. I had never heard about this in my life, about Gary Gilmore. But from what I can tell, and from the older people I've talked to, this was a pretty big deal, especially if you lived around the Salt Lake area. It was like this and the hi-fi murders, which those were crazy. But this book only mentions like one paragraph about the hi-fi murders. But also there was a movie adaptation, a television television movie, has Tommy Lee Jones in it, which is kind of interesting. That came out in 82, so 3 years after this book, and I believe Norman Mailer did the screenplay for that adaptation. So yeah, but anyways, I went off on a tangent there. There's a little bit of this undertoned commentary in the middle section of the book and the end as well, about commercialization and the spectacle, which I think is really cool, that Norman Mailer's kind of pointing that out in a very subtle way. And I appreciate it. I appreciate it that it's been done. It's somewhat self-aware, which is another thing I like about this literary genre. Even at the end of the book, my favorite passage is kind of like, it's very beautiful. It's a quote from a news article. It's like a 2-paragraph excerpt from the news article about after Gary's killed. He was executed by firing squad. I think he was sat in a chair, and the executioner is basically sat in this shed with slits cut out in them that basically, you could only poke the barrel of a gun, a rifle through, and maybe an eye. And that was how they killed him. And the excerpt is talking about how the journalists rushed in there with such greed. And I'll just read it. So this is from Bob Greene. We didn't tell you how he crawled around the sandbags in front of the dead man's chair, the sandbags still fresh with his blood. We didn't tell you how he hurried into the firing squad's canvas booth, and how he squinted out of the vertical slits where the rifles had been, squinted out at the chair, and made ourselves a gift on the same view the executioners had viewed. We didn't tell you how he touched everything, touched every possible surface in the death shed. We didn't tell you the looks on the faces of the prison guards who watched in amazement as we went about our doings with such eagerness, such lust. We didn't tell you what we did to the death chair itself, the chair with the bullet holes in its leather back. We didn't tell you that, did we? Didn't tell you how we inserted our fingers into the holes and rubbed our fingers around, feeling for ourselves how deep and wide those death holes were, feeling it all. Which is very crazy, very deranged, very beautiful. Also, then one of the next excerpts after that is another news excerpt, basically talking about how much it cost the taxpayers of Utah to provide for Gary after his 2 suicide attempts, and the execution, the amount of labor that went into that. And they said it was like, you know, around $60,000, which is probably almost double that in today's money. But yeah, that's basically my main thoughts on the book. I think you should read it, especially just the parts that are most powerful to me, which would be, you know, the murders, every fight between Gary and Nicole, every letter between Gary and Nicole, all the suicide attempts, and the actual death of Gary Gilmore and the funeral service afterwards. I think those are some of the most powerful things I've ever read, and really just try to remember that it is so real, which I'm sure some people, probably most people who have read this book, didn't have that issue because they probably knew about this already. But I didn't have the a priori knowledge about Gary Gilmore, but now it's pretty fascinating. But yeah, if you have any more questions about this, just ask me a question in the comments. I'll try to watch the TV movie. It's on YouTube. There's like 2 cuts of it, but it's on YouTube. It looks pretty good. I watched like the first 5 minutes, and it was like quotes from the book, which I guess makes sense if Norman Mailer wrote it. But anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.